Hi friends, Steve here in the city of Cypress, California at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, and today I have another very sad story to share with you about a young woman who was raped and murdered, and for 45 years investigators searched for her killer only to discover just recently, in fact I think just in the last couple of weeks, that he was buried the entire time just a few hundred yards away from her gravesite. So the killer and the victim are both buried right here at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Cypress, just feet away from each other. And it took 45 years to discover this. How bizarre is that? And that's not the only strange thing about this case. So I'm going to share a little bit more with you, but the weird, odd, just unbelievable coincidences don't end there. And I guess one of the first coincidences, maybe it's not so bizarre, but I visited this cemetery, it was either 2 or 3 years ago, and I haven't been back since, but I was planning to come back this weekend, and yesterday I discovered that the murder victim, Janet Stallcup, is buried here. And I only discovered that because randomly a video was sent to me on YouTube. You know how you log into your channel and YouTube sometimes shows you videos that you might be interested in? So this video about her popped up yesterday and I watched it and I thought, well, I wonder where she's buried. So the person didn't mention, this wasn't a gravesite video. It was just about the cold case and that it took 45 years to solve. And so I thought, well, I wonder where she's laid to rest. Went to findagrave.com and discovered that she's laid to rest right here, just a few rows away from someone else I was planning to visit here today. So, of course, I knew I had to visit her gravesite as well, but the weird thing is, it didn't have a GPS. Since this video that I was watching mentioned that the killer was also buried here, I looked his gravesite up, and sadly, although this does happen an awful lot, his gravesite has a GPS. Hers doesn't, but his does. So I thought, I have to come and visit her gravesite to add a GPS to her final resting place, if nothing else. Why is it that the victims are so often forgotten when the killers aren't? And I don't always show the perpetrators in my videos, but in this case, because the whole point of the story, or one of the major points of the story, is that they're buried so close together and have been for 45 years, I do want to see where he's laid to rest. I do want to see exactly how close it is, if you can actually see her grave from his grave and vice versa. So her name is Janet Stallcup, and she was a 19-year-old nursing student when she was killed on December 23rd, 1976, and one report says that the last time she was seen was when she left to go to a colleague's party. I'm guessing this was a Christmas party since it was a couple days before Christmas. But another report that I read or watched on a video, I can't remember which, said that she was the last one to leave the party late at night. So I don't know which is true, but whether she arrived at the party or not, she never made it home that night. She was found the next day in her car parked in an apartment building nearby in Garden Grove, California, and she'd been raped and strangled. For 45 long years, her family had no idea who carried out this awful murder, but they persisted and they continued, and so did the investigators. And finally, just this year, because of advanced DNA technology abilities, they were able to match his DNA with the DNA found on her body, and they discovered that he had died in 1977, just about 6 months after the murder, and apparently he had a long criminal record and was picked up for something entirely different. And apparently the night that he was locked up in jail, he died. And one report said they didn't know exactly what the cause was. Another said that it was a drug overdose. And I believe the report said that he was picked up on drug charges. His name was Terry Dean Hawkins, and I don't think there was any connection between Stallcup and Hawkins other than just being at the wrong place at the wrong time. So he's supposed to be laid to rest right here in the sheltering trees section. So I'm going to go and see if I can find his gravesite first, and then I'm going to walk over and see if I can find Janet Stallcup's. The section where she's laid to rest and the section where he's laid to rest are directly across the street from each other. And as you can see on his headstone, he died on July 5th, 1977, the day after the 4th of July, and she died a couple of days before Christmas. I'm going to pan around here to the left and zoom in so you can see how close the section is where Janet is laid to rest. Her gravesite is just a few rows behind where my car is parked, and just a few rows to the right. At least that's where it's supposed to be according to her Find a Grave Memorial page, and I'll walk over there in a minute and see if I can find it and added GPS to make it easier for future visitors. He was only 23 years old at the time of his death, so hopefully that provided a little bit of comfort to Janet's family, knowing that there was at least some justice and that he didn't get to live a long life like so many other killers do after they cut short the lives of their innocent victims. And maybe the fact that he's laid to rest here so close to his victim is yet another form of cosmic justice. Sadly, way too many killers don't receive cosmic justice or legal justice, especially here in California. I was just reading that California has the highest number of unsolved homicides in the country. We currently have more than 41,000 cold cases dating back to 1980. When you realize just how many cold cases go unsolved, it makes you realize just how lucky Janet Stallcup's family was to finally have an answer and some sort of closure. Unfortunately, way too many families of homicide victims never get that closure. So it took a while, but I was able to find her gravesite finally. She's laid to rest with her mother, who died about 10 years ago. And that's nice. We get to see them both together. The other weird and kind of spooky thing is that now that I'm here at her gravesite, I can see that from her gravesite, you can see the gravesite of her killer. And the people that are sitting there, visiting their loved ones in their lawn chairs, are a half a dozen rows away from the killer's gravesite. And so, from her gravesite, not only can you see his, but it looks like they're buried in the same row. So how weird is that? I'm not going to count how many graves away they are, but they're in the same row, maybe 50 graves away from each other. I don't know, to me that just seems like a very strange and unusual coincidence. Especially when you consider that they were trying to track down the killer for 45 years. And for the entire time, you could see his gravesite from her gravesite. Is that kind of spooky and weird? And one of the other coincidences is that according to her family, she loved Karen Carpenter. She loved the Carpenters, especially Karen Carpenter. Now, in itself, that's not a huge coincidence. I mean, I love Karen Carpenter. I think everyone loved the Carpenters back in 1976. But when Karen Carpenter died, this was where she was first laid to rest. And she was laid to rest right in the mausoleum, which you can see from Janet's grave. Another strange coincidence is that there's another young woman who was murdered back in 1977, and she's laid to rest in the same section as the man who killed Janet Stallcup. And her murder has yet to be solved, at least as far as I know. If any of you happen to know if it has been solved, please share with us in the comments section. Her name is Kathleen Kimberly Robinson. Does that name sound familiar to any of you? So her body was found on November 16th, 1977 in the Wilshire downtown Los Angeles area, and she was last seen the day before in Santa Monica, I believe at the beach. Apparently she used to love to hitchhike, and that was kind of a thing to do back then. It was a lot safer, at least it seemed a lot safer back then, and men and women hitchhiked all the time. And at first they thought she was a victim of the Hillside Stranglers, and one of the Hillside Strangler victims is laid to rest right here, very close to Janet Stallcup, and just across the street here from Kathleen Robinson. Eventually, investigators ruled that theory out, and so her murder just remains an unsolved mystery to this day, unless things have changed and I haven't heard about it. So please, if any of you know if her killer has been identified or caught, let us know in the comments section. I don't know if it's a strange coincidence or not, but it sure seems odd that 3 young women were killed back in the 1970s, or murdered back in the 1970s, and all 3 are laid to rest here, almost in the same section. The gravesites of Janet Stallcup and Dolly Ann Cepeda are both located right here in the Garden of Protection, near the bronze statue of David. Dolly Ann was murdered in Los Angeles on November 13, 1977, when she was only 12 years old. Dolly and her 14-year-old friend, Sonia Johnson, were last seen outside of the Eagle Rock Mall, getting into an unknown vehicle and driving away. Sadly, a week later, both of their bodies were found in Elysian Park near Dodger Stadium. Sonia is buried in a cemetery in Montebello, California, and Dolly Ann is buried here in Cypress. It's pretty shocking to discover 3 young homicide victims in this one cemetery alone. And these are just the 3 that I know about. But when you consider the large number of unsolved cold cases just here in California alone, it's very likely that there are others buried in this cemetery as well that we just don't know about. It's pretty heartbreaking to think about, but at the same time, it's important to remember them. This week, I want to thank my newest Patreon and PayPal supporters, Zachary Lazard, James Workinger, and Jess Luna. Thank you so much, Zachary, James, and Jess, for your extra generous donations to this channel, which help to make future trips like this possible. So until our next trip to the cemetery together, thanks for sharing the memories, everybody.